100% of the individuals and groups that we're dealing with say they're Muslims waging jihad in the cause of Allah to establish a caliphate under Sharia. This is all about Sharia when we're talking about the Islamic movement. So why aren't they speaking up? Because in Sharia, in Islamic law, it is a capital crime for a Muslim to say anything about another Muslim.
Some scary stuff here to help us better understand the threat. I welcome to the conversation author of Raising a Jihadi Generation and founder of UnderstandingTheThreat.com, John Guandillo. All right, John, so Colonel Smith and I have had a lively discussion revolving around WikiLeaks, the FBI, the Never Trump movement. But I want to talk about with both of you what happens after tomorrow. What happens when we wake up on Wednesday, November 9th, what this nation has to look forward to and the threat that we're facing. And, who better than two people that are fearless in our approach. So I want to open up the conversation, something that we talked about on Facebook Live as well as on my show, and that's understanding the threat. For me, the thing I'm most concerned about is the fact that whether we overtake Mosul or not, to me, it seems like, okay, then what? What happens after that? And what elements are existing right here in the United States we need to be aware of? And I know that you constantly study this. So I want to open it up to you. As far as Wednesday, November 9th goes, what is the most important threat for us to understand?
Well, I think when we talk about whether we're talking about back in Iraq or Afghanistan, or we're talking about right here domestically, we still, since 9/11, have not decided to actually understand the threat. And I think even if Mr. Trump wins, there are a lot of people, I think, that will then become complacent and say, well, there we go. Now we can fix everything. But the problem is that this threat, the Islamic threat specifically, but also, as we talked about last time, it is completely merged now with the hard left, including the Democrat Party, the Marxist movement, which you could say are the exact same thing here in the United States. They are very ingrained in the society. And it's the party, the Democrat Party and the Marxist movement that is actually doing the work for the jihadis in this nation, which we've talked about, how that propels the Islamic movement in the country. So it's going to literally take, at the state and local level, law enforcement, preferably sheriffs and citizens, to actually deal with this threat. Let's say the first thing Donald Trump does is indict the Council on American Islamic Relations, the Muslim Student Associations, Muslim American Society, Islamic Circle of North America, Islamic Society of North America. Who's going to do all those warrants? What about the multiple hundreds of Islamic centers that we know are directly supporting and funding jihad in the United States? I'll tell you who's going to do them. It's not going to be 10,000 FBI agents. It's going to be local and state police officers all over the country. And they need to understand the threat before you can give them orders to go and actually address the threat.
And John, this seems so abstract for folks sitting on the outside thinking, oh, there's no way that these threats are actually in our communities. They pop up from time to time. We see them in Orlando. We see them in San Bernardino. But, from what I discussed with you, this is a living, breathing threat that's there every single day. And I know that Colonel's experienced that not only in the Marine Corps, but as a law enforcement officer as well. So I kind of look to both of you as shepherds for this, because I think that we're all little lambs and we need to understand what we're facing. And then, Colonel, I want to ask you as well, because you fought, for this country and you fought in Muslim majority nations, quite obviously. I see a situation right now where we have ISIS and we take down ISIS. I don't think it would take much, from Desert Storm, Desert Shield. It wouldn't take much to topple that ISIS regime. But then I'm left with, well, then what? What do we have in the United States? We have it in the Middle East. And something that John proposed me last time and that you've also said to me is, who are our friends? Who are our allies in the Middle East? ISIS, we've got them ingrained now. We overtake them. We've got the Shia, the Sunni, the Kurds. From your perspective as well, Colonel, I want you to join in the conversation. And what do we do from here in the Middle East as well as at home to combat the threat?
Well, first of all, I want to reinforce something that John said that I think is getting so grotesquely overlooked because of things we talked about earlier. And that is the co-option and the coordination between the left and radical Islam, which I don't use that term. It's Islam, okay? It's the problem. But it's interesting that nobody will talk about the fact Hillary's slogan, together, but it's stronger together. Who is she talking about when she talks about together? Has anybody ever broken that down? Because I have, and I'm sure John would agree. She's talking about every radical militant movement that you can think of that is absolutely anti-American in the United States of America. That is how the Democrats continue to further their power and their base. And so they have taken into this unholy alliance Islam, and they speak for Muslims. And what they love to do, freedom of religion. Stop. It's not a religion. You and I have had this discussion. It is a worldview with a religious aspect. And what amazes me is Americans refuse to look at this simple fact. You want to be anti-Christian? Fine, be anti-Christian, but at least be intellectually honest that that is a religion that you have to trace through hundreds of individuals and their writings and tie it all together until you get Christ himself who walked the planet. This thing we call Islam, one person, Tommy, everything they believe comes from one human being. That should frighten anybody with a brain.
John, I want you to weigh in on that. So, I mean, you two have both echoed the same thing to me as well, talking about the prophet and talking about the caliphate and talking about what they really want. And I think it's important for Americans to understand what the end goal is, both in the United States, in Europe, in the Middle East, Africa, everywhere, every continent, what they really want. And what is it?
Well, two things you just said that are huge. One, I mentioned this on the show before. Our Chris Gobbets, who is part of UTT, and he's the guy that went undercover at CARE back in 2008. And the book Muslim Mafia was written about his exploits. He said in front of Senator Cruz's committee back in June, if we killed every member of ISIS today, the global movement rolls on. Mm-hmm. That's what we don't understand. So what do they want? They want what you just played in that clip. 100% of them say they want. They want a caliphate under Sharia. Where does that come from? It comes from the Quran, which comes from Allah, but it was revealed to the public, the Muslim and non-Muslim community through one guy, Muhammad. So when you ask, what do they want? He is, according to the Quran and according to Islam, the most perfect example of a man. He's an exalted character. So why do Muslims step the right foot into a mosque first? Because Muhammad did it. Why can't men wear gold? Because Muhammad prohibited it. Why can a man marry a 6-year-old? Because Muhammad did. Why can they torture? Because Muhammad did. Why can they kill the way they kill? First of all, because the Quran says you can crucify, you can stone, you can behead, you can amputate, you can whip. That's in the Quran. Then Muhammad himself did those things. He himself was personally involved when 900 Jews were killed at the Battle of the Trench. This is not rocket science. I agree. This is part of my struggle in the whole 15 years I've been doing this now. Is I'm a very simple guy. I'm a Marine. I look at things logically. I'm an FBI agent, former FBI agent, and I can lay facts on the table and come to logical conclusions. When you lay these facts on a table, it blows people away. The whole nature of what this enemy is trying to do is to shut down this discussion. So just this Saturday, Chris went in and spoke in Virginia, and there are protests to shut it down, to encourage the sheriff that hosted it to shut it down. And yet when he spoke truth, the reality was the handful of Muslims in the room, a couple of them broke down because they didn't know. They didn't know what Islam actually taught, and they literally broke down and left because they realized something, that what he was saying, and people overheard it, was true, that he was speaking truth about what Islam is, and they had not been taught it. So a big part of this is when our leaders categorically say this has nothing to do with Islam, we're not only hurting ourselves, we're hurting people in the Muslim community that self-identify as Muslim, but they don't want anything to do with this. We're not giving them an opportunity. We're not giving them an out. We're hurting these people in the community. At the national security level, this is catastrophic failure. 100% of the organizations our government, Islamic organizations our government's working with, are hostile. Mm-hmm. There's no exception to that. That's the problem. And there is no mystical, peaceful version of Islam out there.
Well, John, I want to talk about that. We have to toss a break. When we come back, I do want to talk about that because that's something that the left is going to hit us with every time. The 1.6 billion, they must all be peaceful, even if a fraction isn't. I want to talk about that when we come back. Okay. Obviously, probably my favorite show we ever had on this network. Next, more truth telling from the Dream Team after the break.